Where was I? Minsk II. The pro-Russian, anti-Russian division in Ukrainian society. I guess we have to visit Maidan. In November 2013, protests started in Kyiv against the pro-Russian government of President Yanukovych. These protests climaxed between the 18th and 20th of February 2014, when fierce fighting between Maidan activists, police, and unidentified others resulted in the deaths of almost 100 civilians and 13 policemen. Like most of you, I only watched it on TV. Was it just a noisy and very deadly political clash between different factions in Ukrainian society, or was it more complicated than that? Was there outside interference, for instance? Did I see Senator John McCain on the podium, sticking his oar in? We've all listened to the famous cell phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeff Pyatt, together calmly picking out a new Ukrainian president. Who could forget Victoria Nuland's casual aside? The EU. Whatever it was, it all turned very nasty. Dead bodies everywhere. Who started it? Who fired the first shot? This is one of the problems with regime change, isn't it? Dead bodies. They're all somebody's loved one. It looks as if all the talks in Maidan's aftermath that led up to Minsk II a year later were a very necessary and worthy attempt to find a solution to a deadly problem in a deeply divided society. To quote General Smedley Butler from 1935, quote, "War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious, and it is the only racket that is international in scope." Since the Second World War, the racket has been our constant companion. Korea, Vietnam, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Palestine. Well, Palestine isn't really a war, is it? Don't get me started. Back to Ukraine. It looked as if the war in Ukraine might die stillborn because people started talking to each other. Mr. Zelensky started talking to Mr. Putin. And by the end of April, a ceasefire agreement had been negotiated and agreed in Istanbul. But then the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, arrived in Kyiv with a message. Hello, Volodymyr. A word in your ear. Forget Istanbul and Minsk and all that. Between you and me, this war suits the Americans down to the ground. They think it'll weaken Russia. So it's been decided to continue it for as long as it takes. And just between you and me, the longer it takes, the better. They'll keep sending you ammo, of course, and they'd like you to, well, you know, just fight on. Wow.
Denazification. Ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, this word has been repeated endlessly in Russian propaganda as the central goal of the special military operation. It sounds absurd. Ukraine's President Zelensky is a Jew, and Nazism is seemingly nowhere to be seen in Ukrainian government, politics, or society. But Putin's crusade against Nazism rests upon the continued existence of a tiny section of the Ukrainian military, known as the Azov Regiment. One glance at their history makes it obvious why they earned the label. A militia formed by radical fascists and white supremacists operating under Nazi symbols, incredibly accused of abuses and outrages upon civilians and captives.
Joel chapter 3 verses 1 and 2. The Lord says, "For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives or the exiles of Judah and Jerusalem." So notice this is looking forward to the days in which we are living, when the Lord is bringing back the Jewish captives from all over the world. From more than 100 nations, Jews have returned to the land of Israel in the last 50 or 60 years. This is the time and the situation. It refers to the regathering of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Then the Lord says this, verse 2, "I will also gather all nations," and that's the word for Gentiles, Goyim, if you know how the Jews speak about Gentiles. "I will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat," and Jehoshaphat means the Lord judges. "And I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land." Now we're talking about the judgment of the nations at the close of this present age. And God says, "I will judge them on the basis of how they've treated the Jews and the land of Israel." That's important to know. And he says, "They have divided up my land." Remember, it's first and foremost God's land. Secondly, it belongs to the Jewish people because God gave it to them by an everlasting covenant for an everlasting possession. It doesn't matter who's in it. The ownership has not changed. It belongs to God and to the Jews. And God is not restoring them because they deserve it. Let me hasten to add that. He's very clear about that. It's not for your sake, but for my holy name's sake. That's what God says. But notice the second charge against the nations is they've divided up my land. You know what dividing up is in modern political language? Partition. They have partitioned my land. Now, in 1920 or thereabouts, the League of Nations assigned to Britain a mandate for the land of Israel, both sides of the Jordan. And the terms of their mandate were to provide a national home for the Jewish people. In 1922, with a stroke of his pen, Winston Churchill signed away 76% of that land to an Arab nation, then called Transjordan, now called Jordan, and in that territory no Jew is permitted to live. So they had divided up the land 76% to 24%. In 1947, the United Nations, the successor to the League of Nations, arranged a scheme by which they would divide up the land, so out of the remaining 24%, Israel would get maybe 10% and 14% would go to the Arabs. What are they guilty of? Dividing up God's land. And those nations are going to have to answer for it. Now, short of open warfare, the British administration did everything in their power to prevent the birth of the State of Israel. And you know what happened? Israel was born and the British Empire fell apart. Without ever losing a major war. The only one they really lost was with the colonists in America. The only major war. Their empire disintegrated. Why? Because they sinned against Israel and their land. This shows you that God takes it seriously.
These are the only countries that voted against the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. The only European countries are the Czech Republic and Hungary. Then we of course add Israel, but also the United States, Argentina, Paraguay, Malawi, Papua New Guinea, and a bunch of Pacific islands.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES10/L31 revision 1 entitled Advisory Opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences arising from Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and from the illegality of Israel's continuous presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed, and please lock the machine.
For the last 2 decades, Germany has been synonymous in Europe with economic stability and prudence. Now, an energy crisis provoked by war in Ukraine is joining with persistent inflation to threaten the stability that some had come to take for granted.
The war in the Ukraine and the energy crisis has hit Germany particularly hard because Germany is very dependent on the import of fossil fuels. Prices have exploded. With high energy prices, the German economy now is sliding into recession.
Over the war in Ukraine, now a transatlantic rift surfacing dramatically this week. The US is talking Ukraine with Russia in Saudi Arabia minus Europe. The excluded Europeans have been talking amongst themselves in a divided house.
For 3 years, the war in Ukraine has pitched Russia against the West. Now, for the first time, the British Prime Minister has explicitly said that he's prepared to deploy British peacekeepers in Ukraine. And he's expected to put pressure on European leaders to do the same at today's emergency summit in Paris. The Prime Minister said the UK has already committed £3 billion a year until at least 2030.
The doc went solo on that ass, but it's still the same. Long Beach is the spot where I serve my cane. Follow me, but don't lose your grip. 9 tris ain't the years there for me to fuck up shit. So I ain't holding nothing back, and motherfucker, I got 5 on the 20 sack. It's like that, and as a matter of fact, cause I never hesitate to put a nigga on his back.
Yeah, so keep out the manuscript. You see that it's a month we drop gangsta.
What's my motherfucking name? Yeah. It's the bow to the wild, creeping and crawling.